Kāti, ko huri tātou i nāi nei ki te kai kōrero e whai ake nei. Successes and challenges local landowners have faced in biodiversity protection and regeneration, and also tips for monitoring success, are representing the QE2 National Trust. Please welcome to our pai kōrero, Malcolm Rutherford. Kei a koe, Malcolm.
Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Malcolm Rutherford and I'm the Gisborne representative for the QE2 National Trust. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the QE2 National Trust does and some of the things we've supported and seen and learnt about revegetation and forest regeneration in this region. So the QE2 National Trust was formed in 1977 by farmers. And back then, the government was subsidising or giving financial incentives for clearing bush and draining wetlands. So sometimes landowners would sell their farm and then hear from the neighbour that the new owner had cleared that patch of bush or drained that wetland that had been so precious. And so this was the first legal mechanism put in place to protect those special places on private land. We don't just work with farmers now though, we work with anyone, any private landowner. And in just over 40 years, we've protected 4,500 covenants covering over 180,000 hectares. In this region, there's about 140 covenants protecting just over 5,000 hectares. So how do we do this? We have a legal agreement with the landowner called a covenant, and this is lodged on the title. The area that's protected is surveyed, the landowner retains ownership of that land, but there is an agreement about what can and can't be done on that land. We can put clauses in to allow for water take for stock. We encourage revegetation planting, and some of the bigger blocks, there's the allowance for huts, and things like that. So each covenant agreement is slightly different and they can be quite flexible. When the covenant is set up, QE2 assists with fencing finances. So we generally give 50% of the fencing costs. In this region, we're aiming for deer fencing, and if a landowner is willing to try and keep deer out of their block, then we'll pay 60% of the costs. But it's quite hard to find a block that can physically be deer fenced, so there's not many of those, but where we can, we love to do that. We then offer ongoing monitoring of the block, so every 2 years I'll come around for a visit and see if the covenant conditions are being met, and if they're not, then we work with the landowner to try and get that covenant going in the right direction, get it improving. Why do we do this? Why is there a need to legally protect? Well, 70% of New Zealand is privately owned, and a lot of that is the lowlands. A lot of the really high biodiversity values, a lot of really rare plants are found in these lowland remnant blocks. Most of the conservation estate, not all of it, but most of it is way up in the hills, and so these lowland remnants are underrepresented. And a lot of landowners think sometimes it's just scrub, but it can be a quite unique type of scrub, or there can be some really interesting things in there. And if they're not protected for future generations, they'll be gone. Also, they're still under threat, which is the need for the legal protection, not just physical protection. Legal protection by itself might not do much because you still have to put a fence up. But legal protection does have a place when people want to develop a covenant, or quarry a covenant, or get rid of a covenant. Then we've had a few cases go through the courts now, and the covenant wins. One of the things we do as part of our monitoring is photo points. So we go back to exactly the same point, and I'd recommend this for anyone that's doing revegetation planting. Take an up-close shot of your planting, but take one from across the hillside or something like that, so you can see the growth over time. Here's a shot from Waikato Eco Sanctuary from 2012 to 2020 of exactly the same spot, and the only thing you can see that's the same is that vertical stick running up the top middle. The regeneration there has been amazing. The goat control and deer control going on there has helped allow this. Here's another shot of another place. This isn't exactly the same spot, but these two photos are taken in the same patch of bush. And you can see with stock out, this is near Nuhaka, with stock out, the understory is just taken off. It's another example is from Wainaki Waterworks bush, where there's been 7 or 8 years of goat control, and the difference you can see, this is in a light well, so it's got away a bit quicker than a lot of the understory there, but you can see massive growth in the understory. And it's not just the growth, it's the diversity of species in there as well. It's really good to see. Mainly QE2 projects are just regeneration of existing bush, so allowing that understory to come up, and the grassy areas often slowly turn to fern, or sometimes turn to blackberry, but if you leave that long enough, most of the time natives come through it and it becomes forest. But at Waikato Eco Sanctuary, there's a whole lot of replanting around the bottom of the hills as well. And so you can see here the hills are coming back in Kānuka, but around the bottom of the hills there's been a whole lot of seed plants, Podocarps and things planted so that birds have a source to go and drop those into the hills. So it's another thing you can think of as these seed islands that are a source. You don't have to put them throughout your whole landscape, but just a couple of patches of higher value trees, but they'll provide seed sources for the rest of your property. Another really great local example is Tuahini Point, where I think it was 20,000 plants were planted. And this is another covenant. One of the values out there that's been protected is the land itself. So the re-veg planting has really slowed the erosion out there, which with cattle on the land was quite rapid. It decreases the amount of sediment going into the ocean, which is good for diving, and so the flow-on effects of looking after our land are massive. Another example is this one. This photo is taken in 2003, and I don't have a comparable photo because there's a huge hedge through the middle of that photo now. But the area between the bush and the road was planted in just general re-veg species. But now, almost 20 years on, the understory in that is quite something. We're starting to get a bit of a subcanopy, with kawakawa really reaching up. And now, underneath, we're getting Podocarps, which is really exciting. So this is because of the proximity to the mature kahikatea and matai right next door. So those seeds, the birds are dropping them right into this re-veg project, and that forest of the future is coming up, waiting for light gaps, and it'll push through and it'll be away. One of the things we focus on with QE2 blocks sometimes is if we can deer fence them, and we have really keen landowners, then that is an opportunity to put some of our rarest plants back in. So I'm calling this high value, high effort. So this is Pittosporum obcordatum going into a brand new deer fenced covenant near Whakaki. They get a wool mat, which is pinned down, and then fert tabs and crystal rain and a bamboo stake on a cardboard tree surround. And the wool mat means we don't have to come back and do clearance around them. And all this is biodegradable. So you can see that the shot on the right is a year later, and the cardboard is almost gone. The wool has gone, but there's still a bare area of grass in the middle, allowing that tree to get away. In contrast to that, a planting that I did recently was at Puawa. I've sort of on a mission to get pingao back into the sand dunes at Puawa, and that is so quick. If you have access to sand dunes that you can plant in, it's quick and it's easy. I think I planted 200 individual plants in an hour and a half. Dig a hole, chuck a fert tab in, chuck a plant in, and stomp on it. And you can plant them quite deep. That's one of the ways you can plant pingao, so they don't whip around in the wind. So you've planted it right, and it's so fast. So yeah, that's part of the Fenua. That's part of recloaking the Fenua from the dunes right up into the hills. So I guess the challenges others have talked about: pest animals, deer and goats and possums, and the damage they do. That's a massive issue on the East Coast. But another one is weeds, and so old house sites are really bad for this. House sites on the edge of bush that the garden's just been left, and all the weeds end up in the bush, and then the birds spread them around to other patches of bush. Any patches of bush near town are really hard to keep weeds out of because of the bird spread. And if you're doing a re-veg project, I'd really encourage you to try and get rid of those weeds first, because it's a real hassle trying to get rid of weeds out of tiny little seedling plants without the seedlings getting killed or overgrown by honeysuckle or old man's beard or something. And then with your re-veg projects, if you can eco-source, I really encourage it. If you know where your plants are coming from, if they're coming from this region, if they're coming from our hills, then they're going to do better on our hills. And so if you're getting them from out of town, you don't know where they're from, I really encourage you to do that. Also supports all our local nurseries, and there's some good community efforts going in with some of the seed collecting, and then you sort of see those seeds go from collection right through to seedlings, and then you can buy them back or grow them on yourself. That's a really cool thing for replanting our Whenua. So yeah, in summary, I'd say the first thing, this is what QE2 is all about, is protect what we've got. Let's keep stock out where we can. Let's get those deer and goat numbers down where we can. Possums, cats, rats, stoats, the more of those things you can target, the better. But cattle, deer, goats are the big ones for me. Get that fence up around the bush, and let's stop spraying out bush. There's so much effort going into replanting, and yet there's a lot of stuff still being sprayed out, some of it quite mature scrub. And underneath that scrub is the next generation of forest for those hills. So yeah, once it's there, if you can plant the edges or plant new areas and keep on top of your pest plants and pest animals, then I think our future's looking bright for Tairāwhiti with all this re-veg going on. If you've got any questions about QE2 or anything I've said, just get in touch. Thanks for your time.
And thank you very much for your time, Malcolm. And as Malcolm said, if you have any questions, hold those questions, or you can even send it by our Facebook page.